She read my love letter on stage as a joke, and the entire auditorium erupted in laughter. My heart stopped for a moment, frozen in disbelief. Every word I had poured out in secret was twisted into a cruel spectacle for everyone to see. Arlene's voice, sharp and mocking, sliced through the air like a blade, and I felt every eye turn to me, burning me with silent judgment. The lines I had written to confess my deepest feelings, the lines I had hoped would bring us closer, became a weapon used to humiliate me. I stood there unable to move as the echoes of her laughter chased me out of the room and deep into my own shame. It wasn't just the embarrassment. It was the realization that the person I loved had no intention of loving me back. For months I had nurtured a fragile hope, believing that maybe, just maybe, she felt the same way. But with that single act, she shattered every dream I'd built. I wanted to vanish, to disappear into the shadows, and erase every trace of what I dared to feel. That night, with trembling hands, I packed a bag and slipped away from the town that held too many memories of rejection and pain. I boarded the last train out, the city lights blurring past the window, reflecting the storm raging inside me. Leaving wasn't just an escape. It was survival. Yet, as the train carried me away, a small voice whispered in the back of my mind, reminding me that running away wouldn't heal the wounds. But the thought of facing Arlene again, of standing beneath the weight of her scorn, was unbearable. I needed distance, time to rebuild the pieces of myself she had broken so mercilessly. Little did I know that leaving town was only the beginning. The journey ahead would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and forgiveness. And as I stepped into the unknown, I vowed that I would never let anyone wield my heart as a weapon again. Alexander's life had always been a quiet one, unassuming, simple, shaped by routine and the steady rhythm of small-town living. Growing up in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, he learned early on the value of keeping his feelings carefully hidden. That's why writing that letter to Arlene was both the bravest and most vulnerable thing he had ever done. Arlene was everything he wasn't. Confident, bold, with a sharp wit that could cut through the thickest tension in any room. She carried herself like she owned the world, but beneath that fierce exterior, Alexander believed there was a softer side, one that only he could reach. Their friendship had grown over years of shared classes, stolen glances, and conversations that lingered long after everyone else had left. He remembered the first time they truly connected, not in the hallways of their high school, but in the dusty corners of the local library. Arlene had been struggling with a difficult math problem, her brows furrowed in frustration. Alexander, ever the quiet thinker, had sat beside her and patiently walked through the solution step by step. It was the first time she had smiled at him without reservation, and in that moment, something shifted. Their friendship blossomed from there. Shared lunches, weekend study sessions, and the comfort of knowing someone would always be there. Alexander was drawn to her fire, her unapologetic nature, and the way she challenged him to come out of his shell. For Arlene, Alexander was a steady presence, someone who listened without judgment and offered kindness when the world felt harsh. Despite their closeness, Alexander had never dared to confess the feelings that bloomed quietly inside him. The fear of rejection, of ruining the delicate balance they shared, kept his heart locked away. Instead, he chose to write a letter that spoke the words he couldn't say aloud. In that letter, he laid bare his hopes, his dreams, and the love he had nurtured in silence. Laura, Alexander's longtime friend and confidant, was the first to know about the letter. Practical and grounded, she had urged him to be honest with Arlene, believing that truth was the only path to peace. "She deserves to know how you feel," Laura had told him one evening as they sat beneath the fading light of a street lamp. "And you deserve to find out if it's real." Then there was Octavio, Arlene's childhood friend and constant companion. Handsome, confident, and sometimes a bit arrogant, Octavio seemed to glide effortlessly through life. Alexander had never liked the way Octavio looked at Arlene, as if she were a prize to be won rather than a person with a heart. Still, he respected the history they shared and knew that winning Arlene's affection wouldn't be easy. The truth was, Alexander's feelings for Arlene went beyond friendship. He admired her fiercely and wanted nothing more than to be the person she could trust with all her secrets and fears. But beneath that admiration was a gnawing doubt, a whisper that perhaps she saw him only as a friend or a convenient companion. Their relationship had always been a delicate dance. Moments of closeness shadowed by silence, gestures filled with meaning that neither dared to fully acknowledge. Arlene's sharp humor often masked her own vulnerabilities, while Alexander's quiet nature concealed the depth of his devotion. As he sat alone in his room the night before the letter was read aloud to an unsuspecting crowd, Alexander felt the weight of all these unspoken truths pressing down on him. He had no idea how the night would unfold, or how far it would push him from everything he thought he knew about love and friendship. He only knew that, no matter what happened, his heart had been laid bare, and there was no turning back. The night the auditorium fell silent before Arlene tore open the envelope was the night everything changed. What I had hoped would be a private confession became a public spectacle, and with it, the fragile trust between us shattered like glass, underfoot. I remember standing at the back of the hall, heart pounding, as Arlene stepped onto the stage clutching the folded letter. The spotlight caught her smirk before she unfolded the pages and began to read aloud. Her voice was laced with mockery, each word dripping with a venom I hadn't anticipated. Laughter bubbled up around the room like a rising tide, and the faces of classmates I once called friends twisted in amusement at my expense. But it wasn't just the humiliation. It was the sting of betrayal. Arlene was supposed to be different, someone who understood the quiet ache of unspoken emotions. Yet here she was, weaponizing my vulnerability for her amusement, eroding the very foundation of our friendship in front of everyone. Afterwards, I found her backstage, her expression unreadable. I confronted her, voice barely steady. "Why would you do that? Why turn my feelings into a joke?" Her eyes flashed, sharp and cold. "It was just a prank, Alexander. You're taking this way too seriously." "But it's not a joke to me," I whispered, the weight of her words sinking in. "It was my heart." She laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound. "Maybe you should have thought about that before writing it." That moment planted a seed of doubt. Was I foolish to believe she cared? Had I mistaken familiarity for something more? The walls I'd built around my feelings crumbled, leaving me exposed and raw. Word spread quickly. Whispers followed me down the hallways, some sympathetic, many cruel. The letter became a symbol not of love, but of embarrassment. Even those who had once smiled my way avoided my gaze, uncomfortable in the wake of the spectacle. At home, Laura tried to comfort me, but her words felt hollow. "People can be thoughtless, Alex. Don't let this define you." Yet, every time I closed my eyes, I heard Arlene's laughter echoing, a constant reminder of my shattered hopes. Complicating everything was Octavio. Rumors swirled that he had encouraged the prank, feeding Arlene's scorn. I couldn't decipher whether it was jealousy or something deeper driving his actions, but his presence only deepened the wound. Every encounter with him was a silent battle, the tension thick and unspoken. Days passed, and I found myself retreating further, questioning not only Arlene's feelings but my own worth. The letter, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a chain binding me to a past I desperately wanted to escape. In the quiet moments between classes, I wrestled with a cruel dilemma. Should I confront Arlene and demand the truth, risking more pain? Or should I walk away, protecting my heart from further harm but losing the connection I had treasured? The choice wasn't easy. Every fiber of me screamed to fight for what I believed in, but the fear of rejection and continued humiliation held me back. The line between courage and self-preservation blurred until I was left standing alone, caught in the painful in-between. As the days grew colder, so did my resolve. The emotional storm inside me raged unchecked, threatening to consume the boy who once dared to dream of love. Alexander sat alone in his dimly lit room, the silence pressing in around him like a suffocating weight. The laughter from the auditorium still echoed relentlessly in his mind, a haunting reminder of the night Arlene had shattered everything he had hoped for. His chest tightened with a pain that was both familiar and new, a mixture of heartbreak, humiliation, and a deep, gnawing loneliness that seemed to settle into his bones. He replayed the scene over and over, each time feeling the sting sharpen. How had something so carefully written, so honest, become a weapon against him? The words he'd penned with trembling hands, the vulnerable truths he had dared to reveal, now felt like shards of glass cutting through his spirit. There was anger, too, simmering just beneath the surface. Anger at Arlene for betraying his trust, at Octavio for fueling the flames, and at himself for believing in something that wasn't meant to be. Yet beneath the anger, a fragile thread of confusion twisted inside him. Was it really betrayal? Or had he misunderstood the nature of their relationship all along? Had he misread her smiles and moments of kindness as something more than friendship? The night stretched long and sleepless as Alexander grappled with these questions. His thoughts were a turbulent sea, waves of hope crashing against walls of despair. He longed to reach out to Arlene, to demand clarity, to hear her say she never meant to hurt him. But each time he considered it, fear clenched his throat. What? If she laughed again? What if the rejection was worse than the silence? In the quiet, memories surfaced. The way she looked at him in moments that felt charged with unspoken meaning, the times she had stood by him without a word, the subtle warmth hidden beneath her usual aloofness. Were those moments lies? Or fragments of a love neither of them dared admit? Laura's voice echoed in his mind, a voice of reason and comfort. You deserve honesty, Alex. Don't let someone else's cruelty define your worth. But the words felt distant, like a lifeline thrown from the shore to a drowning man. Days passed in a blur. Alexander found himself drifting through school corridors, a ghost amid familiar faces. The laughter had faded, but so had the warmth. Conversations were strained, glances avoided. Even Naomi, a friend who had quietly watched from the sidelines, seemed unsure how to bridge the growing chasm. Each morning, Alexander wrestled with a silent battle, the desire to move forward and the pull of the past. He clung to routines, studying, working part-time, the quiet solace of books. But beneath it all, an ache persisted, an emptiness that no distraction could fill. Hope flickered faintly when a message from Laura appeared. Remember, sometimes pain is the first step toward growth. You're stronger than you think. He stared at the words, drawing a tentative breath. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was not the end, but a beginning disguised in sorrow. Still, the question lingered. Could he forgive? Could he trust again? And most painfully of all, could he ever let Arlene back into his heart? Or was that door closed forever? In the ice. The solitude of that night, Alexander made a silent promise. To find the strength to heal, to reclaim himself from the shadows of betrayal, and to write his own story, one not defined by heartbreak, but by resilience. Weeks after the painful fallout, Alexander's world tilted once more when a letter arrived unexpectedly. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakably Arlene's. His hands trembled as he broke the seal, half expecting another blow, but what lay inside unsettled him in a different way. A confession wrapped in sorrow and contradiction. In her letter, Arlene wrote of guilt she hadn't dared voice aloud, of nights spent wrestling with the cruelty of her actions. She claimed the stage prank had been meant as a joke among friends, a misguided attempt to deflect her own feelings of vulnerability. She admitted she had been afraid to acknowledge what was growing between them, afraid of losing control, in a world she desperately tried to command. But what shocked Alexander most was her revelation about Octavio. She confessed that his influence was far greater than he let on, that he had pressured her into the public mockery as a way to keep Alexander at arm's length. According to Arlene, Octavio had been jealous and manipulative, orchestrating scenes to ensure she remained untouchable, unreachable, his possession rather than hers to choose. The letter tore open old wounds, but also kindled a flicker of hope. Perhaps Arlene's betrayal had not been purely her own, but a tangled web spun by forces beyond her control. Yet with this hope came confusion. Could he trust her words now, or were they just another layer of manipulation? As Alexander wrestled, with the letter's contents, Octavio appeared unannounced at the bookstore where he worked. His arrival was like a storm breaking, a sudden, unwelcome force. His gaze was sharp, calculating, and the smirk that played on his lips hinted at secrets meant to unsettle. "You shouldn't trust everything you read," Octavio said smoothly, sliding a folded paper across the counter. It was a message from Arlene, sent hours before the letter, expressing regret but also warning Alexander to stay away. The implication was clear. Arlene was playing both sides, and Octavio was the puppeteer pulling the strings. Alexander's heart clenched. The woman he had loved, the friend he had trusted, seemed caught between loyalty and fear. And Octavio, once just a rival in the background, was now the key player in a game he didn't understand. The emotional turmoil intensified. Alexander felt himself sinking deeper into a maze of doubt and betrayal, unsure where the truth ended and deception began. The walls he had begun to rebuild were cracking once again, and the path forward was shrouded in shadows. Caught between the raw honesty of Arlene's letter and the cold calculation in Octavio's warning, Alexander faced a choice: to confront the tangled web head-on or retreat into the safety of solitude once more. The stakes had never been higher, and the lines between love and manipulation blurred beyond recognition. The day of reckoning arrived on a gray afternoon that seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside Alexander's chest. Months of confusion, heartbreak, and shadowed truths had led him to this moment, the confrontation he had avoided yet knew was inevitable. The familiar auditorium, once a place of dreams and whispered secrets, now stood as the stage for the final act of a story that had torn him apart. Alexander arrived early, the weight of his emotions pressing down as he stepped into the quiet hall. The seats, empty now, echoed the absence that had settled between him and Arlene. She was already there, standing near the center of the stage, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betraying the turmoil within. "Alexander," she said, softly, her voice breaking the silence like a fragile glass. "I didn't think you'd come." He swallowed the lump in his throat, fighting the surge of memories that threatened to overwhelm him. "I had to. We need to end this, to understand what this all means before it consumes us both." The tension was palpable as they faced each. Other years of unspoken words and tangled emotions hanging heavy in the air. Alexander held out Arlene's letter, the pages worn and folded from countless readings. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you betray me that night? And why the silence afterward?" Arlene's eyes flickered with, "Hon." "Because I was scared. Scared of what I felt for you, scared of losing control. Octavio, he pushed me to act, to protect what he believed was his. But the truth is, I never wanted to hurt you." Alexander's heart clenched, the words he had longed to hear mingling with the sting of betrayal. "And the letter? The joke on stage?" She looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. "It was meant to deflect attention from myself. I thought if I laughed at it first, I could survive it. But I was wrong." Before he could respond, Octavio stepped forward from the shadows, his presence commanding the room. "You think this is about love?" he sneered. "This is about power, control. Arlene was my ally, not my pawn. She made choices." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Choices that tore us apart." Octavio shrugged. "Sometimes the game isn't about winning love. It's about keeping what's yours." The room seemed to close in as Alexander confronted not only Arlene's hurt, but the manipulative force Octavio represented. A whirlwind of emotions crashed within him: rage, sorrow, and a desperate need for clarity. In that moment, a startling realization dawned. The pain he felt was not solely from Arlene's actions, but from the complex web of fear, control, and unspoken desires that had bound them all. Love had been tangled in deceit, and trust had been shattered by invisible hands. Arlene, stepped closer, her voice trembling. I never stopped caring for you, Alexander, but I had to fight for myself, too. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Then fight with me, not against me. Let's break these chains together. The auditorium, once a place of mockery, now held a fragile hope. Two hearts battered but not broken, standing amid the ruins, daring to believe in a future reclaimed. As the storm outside began to wane, Alexander knew that healing would not be easy. But this confrontation, raw, painful, and honest, was the first step toward redemption. The echoes of the past might never fully fade, but the promise of tomorrow glimmered bright in the silence between them. Months passed since that stormy confrontation, but Alexander's life had changed irrevocably. The fragile hope born in the auditorium's silence had blossomed into something neither he nor Arlene had dared to imagine. They weren't naive. Trust once broken was hard to rebuild, but with every shared word and every honest gesture, the cracks in their fractured relationship began to heal. Yet, beneath the surface of reconciliation, Alexander harbored a quiet fire, a resolve born from the bitterness of betrayal and the scars it left behind. Arlene's public mockery, fueled by Octavio's manipulations, had cost him dearly. His reputation, his peace, and precious time lost to shadows of doubt. The town's whispers hadn't faded, and some faces still held judgment in their eyes. Alexander knew forgiveness was not just for healing, but also for reclaiming power. He decided the time had come, not just to mend, but to rise. First, he confronted Octavio, not with rage, but with calculated precision. Alexander gathered proof, hidden messages, overheard conversations, and the subtle ways Octavio had manipulated, not just Arlene, but many others in their circle to maintain control. This evidence, compiled carefully and anonymously, found its way into the hands of those who mattered: family, community leaders, and the very school board that had once turned a blind eye. The fallout was swift. Octavio's influence crumbled. As allies distanced themselves, his arrogance replaced by desperation. The playground kingpin was dethroned, not with violence, but with undeniable truth. Alexander watched from the sidelines, silent but victorious, his revenge not petty but purposeful, a reclamation of dignity and justice. As for Arlene, their relationship deepened beyond the fragile beginnings of forgiveness. She worked hard to earn back the trust she had fractured, openly acknowledging her mistakes and the pain she caused. Her public apology, heartfelt and unguarded, silenced the last whispers of resentment. Together they faced the scars, not as enemies, but as partners determined to write a new chapter. Alexander's growth extended beyond the personal. He excelled in his studies, his focus sharpened by the trials endured. His friends rallied around him, and even those once skeptical began to see the strength beneath his quiet demeanor. Laura remained his steadfast confidant, her unwavering belief a beacon through dark days. On the anniversary of the night that had nearly broken him, Alexander invited Arlene back to that same auditorium. The seats were filled, not with mocking, laughter, but with faces eager to witness redemption. He stood before them, a calm confidence replacing the uncertainty of years past. In his hand, he held a new letter, not one of unspoken feelings, but of gratitude and resolve. He read aloud words that echoed his journey, the lessons learned, and the promise of a future forged through resilience. When he finished, the room erupted, not in scorn, but in applause and respect. Arlene stepped forward, taking his hand. Together, they smiled, not as broken souls but as warriors who had survived the battles within and without. Their story became one of ultimate revenge, not of vengeance through harm, but through rising above betrayal, reclaiming identity, and embracing truth. It was a testament to the power of forgiveness, the strength in vulnerability, and the unyielding human spirit. As the final curtain fell, Alexander knew one thing with certainty: the echoes of the past would never define him again. He was no longer the boy humiliated by a cruel joke, but the man who turned pain into power and heartbreak into hope.